the Ozark Mountains of Missouri, conceal more than limestone caves and forgotten homesteads, and my morgue sits carved into the hillside where Confederate surgeons once snapped amputated limbs like cordwood. We're tucked between Potosi and Farmington, where Highway 8 curves through valleys that swallow cell phone signals and GPS coordinates. The building used to be Mercy General Hospital until 1987, when they moved operations to the new facility in Park Hills and left us with the basement morgue that nobody wanted to renovate. My name is Ezra Whitlock, and I've been working night shifts here for 8 months now. Before this, I was finishing my mortuary science degree at Southern Illinois, but my student loans were drowning me faster than a flash flood in the current river. When Dr. Faye Hutchins posted the job opening on the state board, the pay was double what anyone else offered, enough to clear my debt and maybe save for a place that doesn't smell like formaldehyde and regret. The work seemed straightforward when I started. Rural counties have different needs than city morgues. We handle everything from hunting accidents to overdoses, plus the occasional body that surfaces after spring thaws in the abandoned zinc mines. Missouri holds records for people who vanish into these hills and never come out, and we're often the last stop for whatever gets found. Dr. Hutchins runs the facility with her assistant, Pearl Kostner, who's lived in these counties her entire 73 years. Pearl knows every family name carved into cemetery stones from here to Saint, Genevieve, and she's the one who explained why we follow certain protocols that aren't taught in any textbook. The rules exist because this particular stretch of the Ozarks has been collecting bodies longer than anyone wants to calculate, and some of those bodies aren't as cooperative as medical science suggests they should be. The basement extends deeper into the hillside than the original blueprints show. Pearl says they kept digging during construction until they hit the old hospital's foundation, then kept going because they found storage rooms that were already there. Natural caves branch off from our main corridor, sealed with steel doors that require 2 people to unlock. The temperature stays constant at 58 degrees year-round, even when July heat pushes surface temperatures past 95. 3 weeks into the job, I learned why the previous night attendant quit without notice. Tommy Brazelton had worked here for 6 years before he walked out during his shift and drove straight to the sheriff's office, demanding they relocate him to protective custody in Jefferson City. Pearl never told me exactly what Tommy saw, but she handed me a laminated card with 6 protocols typed in courier font, each one numbered and precise. "These keep you safe," she said, watching my face as I read through them. "Follow them exactly. No exceptions. No shortcuts." Tommy thought he knew better. I should have asked more questions then, but the pay was good, the work was steady, and I figured every job has its quirks. I was wrong about that last part. Pearl handed me the laminated card on a Tuesday evening in February, when sleet was coating Highway 8 and making the drive from Farmington treacherous. The protocols were typed on an old typewriter, the kind that left uneven impressions on the paper. Night shift protocols, Ozark County Morgue. 1. Never enter Preparation Room C between 11:47 p.m. and 12:23 a.m. Lock the door at 11:45 p.m. and do not unlock it until 12:25 a.m., regardless of any sounds you hear from inside. 2. If you hear humming coming from the basement storage area, immediately turn on the radio in the main office and tune it to 104.7 FM. Keep the volume at level 6 until the humming stops. 3. Any body that arrives with flowers still clutched in their hands must be processed before midnight. Do not remove the flowers until the paperwork is complete. 4. If the temperature in cold storage drops below 45 degrees, evacuate the building and call Dr. Hutchins. Do not attempt to investigate the cause. 5. Should you encounter anyone in the halls who claims to be looking for their relative, direct them to the front office and call security. Do not provide any information about current residents. 6. The service elevator should not be used after 10 p.m. unless accompanied by another staff member. If it arrives on your floor without being called, do not board it. I read through the list twice, then looked up at Pearl. She was organizing intake forms at her desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose like they'd been there since the Carter administration. "Is this some kind of orientation joke?" I asked. Pearl glanced over her glasses. Tommy thought it was funny too, right up until his 3rd week. What happened in his 3rd week? She pulled out a filing cabinet drawer and thumbed through folders. Tommy decided Rule 1 was probably just about ventilation issues. Figured he'd take a quick look in Prep Room C around midnight, see what all the fuss was about. And he called Dr. Hutchins at 12:47 a.m., speaking so fast she could barely understand him. Said he'd found something in that room that shouldn't exist, something that had been waiting for someone to open that door. Pearl closed the filing cabinet with a metallic snap. Next morning, he submitted his 2 weeks' notice. I folded the card and slipped it into my wallet. So what exactly is in Preparation Room C? Nothing during regular hours. We use it for standard embalming procedures, just like Rooms A and B, but between 11:47 and 12:23. Pearl shrugged. Some things don't need explaining, Ezra. They just need following. Dr. Hutchins emerged from her office carrying a steaming mug of coffee that smelled like it could dissolve paint. She was younger than I'd expected when I first met her, maybe 45, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and surgical scrubs that looked like they'd seen better decades. "Ezra's asking about the protocols," Pearl said. Dr. Hutchins nodded. "Good. Questions mean you're taking them seriously." The previous attendant before Tommy, fellow named Garrett Moberly, thought he could improve our procedures, make them more efficient. What happened to him? Garrett's fine. He transferred to the county morgue in Cape Girardeau, where they don't have our particular challenges. Dr. Hutchins sipped her coffee, but he left here after violating Rule 4. Found the cold storage at 38 degrees one night and decided to investigate instead of evacuating. I waited for her to continue. He spent the rest of his shift locked in the supply closet, calling his ex-wife in St. Louis and begging her to come pick him up. Claimed something was moving around in the cold storage that wasn't on any of our intake logs. Moving around? Dr. Hutchins set down her mug. The Ozarks have been collecting the dead for centuries, Ezra. Native burial grounds, Civil War casualties, mine accidents, hunting mishaps. Sometimes the boundaries between where they are and where they should be get a little blurred. Pearl stood up and pulled on her coat. The rules aren't suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're the difference between finishing your shift and ending up as one of our residents. She gathered her purse and headed for the door. I'll see you tomorrow evening. Your first solo shift starts at 11 p.m. After they left, I walked through the facility, familiarizing myself with the layout. Preparation rooms A, B, and C lined the main corridor. Cold storage occupied the end of the hall, behind heavy steel doors. The basement storage area was accessible through a stairwell that seemed to descend further than necessary. Everything looked normal, clinical, professional. But as the clock above the reception desk approached 11 p.m., I found myself checking the lock on Preparation Room C twice, then a third time, just to be sure. My first solo shift began with paperwork. 3 bodies had arrived that afternoon. A hunting accident from Ione County, an elderly woman who died peacefully at home in Bismarck, and a John Doe found in the current river near Acres Ferry. The hunter, Clayton Wills, age 26, had taken a tumble from his tree stand and broken his neck. Simple case, tragic but straightforward. The elderly woman, Bernice Hoffmeister, clutched a bouquet of dried wildflowers in her left hand. According to the intake notes, her granddaughter had placed them there before the ambulance arrived. Rule 3 echoed in my mind. Process before midnight. I checked the wall clock, 11:23 p.m. Plenty of time. I wheeled Mrs. Hoffmeister into preparation room A and began the standard procedures. Her skin had the waxy pallor common in natural deaths, and her grip on the flowers was surprisingly firm. Rigor mortis could explain it, but something about the way her fingers curved around the stems seemed protective rather than rigid. At 11:44 p.m., I was finishing her paperwork when the overhead lights in Prep Room A dimmed for a moment, then returned to normal. Power fluctuations weren't unusual in rural Missouri, especially during winter storms, but the timing made me glance toward Preparation Room C. Rule 1. Lock the door at 11:45 p.m. I walked down the corridor, fishing the keys from my belt. Prep Room C looked identical to the others. Stainless steel tables, overhead lighting, drain in the center of the floor. Nothing suggested why it required special handling for 36 minutes every night. The lock turned easily. I tested the handle twice, confirming it was secure, then headed back to finish Mrs. Hoffmeister's intake. That's when I heard the humming. It started low, almost below the range of conscious hearing, like the distant rumble of freight trains crossing the Mississippi bridges. But as I stood in the corridor between Prep Rooms A and C, the sound resolved into something more recognizable, a melody, old hymnal, maybe Amazing Grace, or something similar, but sung without words in a voice that seemed to emerge from the basement storage area. Rule 2. Radio, 104.7 FM, Volume 6. I jogged to the main office, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floors. The radio was an ancient Zenith model that probably predated the Clinton administration. I turned it on and tuned to 104.7, adjusting the volume to exactly level 6. Static filled the speakers, then cleared to reveal a late-night talk show discussing UFO sightings in the Arkansas Delta. The host's voice was cheerfully mundane, a stark contrast to the otherworldly humming that continued to drift up from the basement. I returned to Preparation Room A, where Mrs. Hoffmeister waited on the table. The dried flowers in her hands had changed. What had been simple wild flowers, black-eyed Susans and purple clover, now included species I didn't recognize. Pale blue petals that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, and thin stems that looked more like carved bone than plant matter. The humming stopped. I glanced at the radio, still broadcasting from the main office, then back at the flowers. They looked normal again. Standard Missouri wildflowers, dried and brittle with age. Maybe the lighting had played tricks on my vision. Long shifts could do that, especially in a basement facility where natural light never penetrated. I completed Mrs. Hoffmeister's paperwork and moved her to cold storage, checking the thermometer as I entered. 56 degrees. Well within normal range. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The John Doe from Current River waited in the corridor, still wrapped in the body bag that had transported him from the recovery site. His paperwork was minimal, estimated age between 30 and 40, no identification, no missing person reports that matched his description. Drowning victims from the Ozark rivers were common enough. especially during spring when snowmelt swelled the waterways and created dangerous currents. I transferred him to Preparation Room B and unzipped the bag. The smell hit me first. Not decomposition. This body had been preserved by cold water and showed minimal decay. Instead, I detected something like wet limestone, the mineral scent of deep caves where water had carved through rock for millennia. His skin was pale gray, almost translucent, and his hair had been bleached white by prolonged water exposure. But his eyes were open. Drowning victims sometimes died with their eyes open. It wasn't medically unusual. What made me step back from the table was the way those eyes seemed to track my movement. Peripheral vision playing tricks. Probably. The mind's tendency to find patterns and faces in random arrangements. I reached for his eyelids to close them properly. His hand moved. Not much. Just a slight twitch of the fingers, like someone reaching for something just out of grasp. Post-mortem muscle contractions weren't uncommon. Gases building up in tissues could cause movement that looked eerily lifelike. Medical school had covered this extensively. But gas-induced movements were usually random. This looked purposeful. I stepped back and checked his paperwork again. Time of death was estimated at 72 hours prior to discovery. Body temperature had matched the river water when they pulled him out. No vital signs, no brain activity, no pulse. Clinically dead by every measurable standard. The radio crackled from the main office. The UFO discussion giving way to commercials for tractor dealerships and Baptist churches. Normal late-night Missouri radio. The kind of programming that filled the hours when most people were asleep. In Preparation Room B, the John Doe's hand twitched again. I made a decision that probably violated several protocols. I needed more light, better visibility to examine what might be causing the movement. The overhead fluorescence cast harsh shadows that could create optical illusions. I reached for the adjustable lamp mounted above the table. As soon as I turned it on, the body went completely still. The eyes were still open, but they no longer seemed to follow my movement. The fingers that had twitched moments before now lay motionless against the stainless steel surface. Everything looked exactly as it should for a drowning victim recovered from cold water. I checked the wall clock. 12:15 a.m. I'd been working for over an hour without realizing it. From the direction of Preparation Room C came the sound of a door handle turning. Slow, careful, like someone testing whether it was locked. The handle stopped moving. Whatever was on the other side seemed to understand that the door wouldn't open. After a moment, I heard what might have been footsteps moving away from the door, heading deeper into the facility. At 12:25 a.m., exactly, I unlocked Preparation Room C and looked inside. Empty. Clean. Nothing to suggest it had been occupied during the restricted hours, but the air inside felt different, warmer than the rest of the facility, and humid in a way that reminded me of summer thunderstorms building over the Missouri River. I locked it again and finished my shift without further incident. Thursday night brought 3 new arrivals and a maintenance issue that made me appreciate why the protocols existed. The heating system had been acting up all week, and Dr. Hutchins warned me that the basement storage area might get colder than usual. "Keep an eye on the thermometer in cold storage," she said before leaving. "If it hits 45 degrees, don't hesitate. Just get out and call me." The first 2 bodies were routine. A car accident victim from Highway 67 and an elderly man who died of a heart attack while feeding his cattle near Potosi. Both processed smoothly, filed correctly, moved to cold storage without incident. The third arrival came at 10:47 p.m., delivered by Hollis Kemp, a deputy sheriff who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Found her about 6 miles up Courtois Creek, Hollis said, helping me transfer the body bag from his patrol car to our gurney. Hikers spotted her yesterday morning. Been in the water maybe a week. Coroner estimates. The woman looked to be in her 30s, with dark hair and clothing that suggested she hadn't been dressed for outdoor activities. No identification, no missing person reports that matched her description. Another John Doe case, except this would be Jane Doe until someone claimed her or we exhausted our identification options. Anything unusual about the recovery? I asked, signing the transfer paperwork. Hollis shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Water was warm where we found her. Real warm, even though the rest of Courtois Creek is running cold as winter runoff, and the hikers who called it in. He paused. They said they heard singing coming from that stretch of creek. Hymns, maybe. But when we got there, everything was quiet. After Hollis left, I wheeled Jane Doe into Preparation Room B. The mineral scent that had surrounded the previous river victim was stronger this time, mixed with something that reminded me of the sulfur springs that dot the Ozark landscape. Her skin had the same translucent quality I'd seen before, and when I opened the body bag completely, I discovered she was clutching something in her right hand. Not flowers this time. River stones, smooth limestone pebbles that looked like they'd been polished by decades of water flow. According to the intake notes, her hand had been clenched like that when they pulled her from Courtois Creek, and rigor mortis had locked it in place. I didn't remember any protocol specifically about river stones, but Rule 3 mentioned flowers. Similar principle, maybe. I decided to complete her paperwork before midnight, just to be safe. At 11:30 p.m., the temperature alarm sounded. It was a soft chime, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it. But I'd been checking the cold storage thermometer every 20 minutes since my shift started, watching the needle creep downward from 56 degrees to 52, then 50, then 48. Now it read 46 degrees. Rule 4 was clear: evacuate at 45 degrees. I had maybe 10 minutes before hitting that threshold, assuming the temperature continued dropping at the same rate. I could finish Jane Doe's intake, move her to cold storage, and monitor the situation closely. Or I could follow the protocol exactly and call Dr. Hutchins the moment that needle touched 45. I chose to finish the paperwork. That was my first mistake. By 11:45 p.m., Jane Doe was ready for transfer, and the thermometer in cold storage read exactly 45 degrees. I should have evacuated then. Instead, I convinced myself that the reading was stable, not actively dropping. I could move this one body to storage, lock Preparation Room C according to Rule 1, then assess whether the temperature warranted calling Dr. Hutchins. I wheeled Jane Doe down the corridor toward cold storage. The limestone pebbles in her hand rattled softly as the gurney rolled over uneven spots in the floor. When I opened the heavy steel doors, cold air rolled out like fog from a deep cave. 43 degrees. The needle was definitely moving now, dropping toward 42 as I watched. I needed to get out, call Dr. Hutchins, let her deal with whatever was causing the temperature drop. But Jane Doe was already halfway through the doorway, and backing out the gurney would take longer than simply pushing forward to one of the empty storage units. I stepped into cold storage. The temperature hit me like jumping into Merrimack Spring in January. But it wasn't just cold. It felt dense, almost viscous, like walking through liquid nitrogen that had somehow learned to flow around living tissue without freezing it solid. My breath came out in clouds that dissipated too quickly, as if the air itself was consuming the moisture. The other bodies were wrong. Mrs. Hoffmeister lay in her designated unit, but the dried wildflowers in her hands had grown. Fresh green stems extended from her fingers, tiny buds opening into blooms that shouldn't exist in February, in a morgue, in 43-degree air. The elderly man from Potosi had his eyes open, staring at the ceiling with pupils that reflected the overhead lights like mirrors. And the John Doe from Current River, the one I'd processed on Tuesday night, was sitting up. Not completely upright, but propped on his elbows, head turned toward the door as if he'd been waiting for someone to enter. Water dripped from his hair, pooling on the stainless steel surface beneath him, even though his body had been dry when I'd moved in here 2 nights ago. I backed toward the exit, pulling Jane Doe's gurney with me. The thermometer now read 41 degrees. Something moved in the far corner of cold storage. Behind the units I couldn't see clearly from the doorway. Not mechanical movement, something organic, purposeful. Like breathing, but deeper and slower than human lungs could manage. I got Jane Doe out of cold storage and slammed the steel doors shut. My hands shook as I fumbled for my cell phone to call Dr. Hutchins, but the display showed no signal. It never did in the basement levels of the morgue, something about the hillside interfering with transmission. The landline was in the main office. I ran down the corridor past preparation rooms A and B, toward the front of the facility. Behind me, I heard the heavy steel doors of cold storage opening again. I didn't look back. The office phone rang 4 times before Dr. Hutchins answered. She sounded alert despite the late hour, like she'd been expecting this call. Ezra? What's the temperature reading? 41 degrees when I checked last. Maybe lower now. Are you out of the building? I'm in the main office. Cold storage is contained, but get out. Now. Don't stop to collect anything. Don't check on the storage units. Don't worry about Jane Doe. Just leave. Through the phone, I could hear her moving around, gathering car keys and medical equipment. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Wait for me in the parking lot. Dr. Hutchins? There's something else. The bodies in cold storage. I know, Ezra. We'll handle it when I get there. Just get outside. I hung up and started toward the exit, but stopped at the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Wet footsteps, like someone walking through shallow water. They were coming from the direction of cold storage, moving slowly toward the main office. The service elevator chimed softly as it arrived on our floor. Nobody had called it. Rule 6 echoed in my mind as the elevator doors opened to reveal an empty car. But empty wasn't quite accurate. Water covered the floor of the elevator, clear and cold, and flowing like it was fed by an underground spring. The wet footsteps in the corridor stopped just outside the office door. I looked at the exit, 30 feet away, across open space. I looked at the elevator, 15 feet, but Rule 6 specifically prohibited riding it alone after 10 p.m. The door handle of the main office began to turn. The office door opened before I could decide between the exit and the elevator. Jane Doe stood in the doorway, water streaming from her hair and clothing, the limestone pebbles still clutched in her right hand. Her eyes were open now, gray-green like the Current River and spring flood. And when she looked at me, recognition flickered across her face. Not the blank stare of the dead, but the focused attention of someone who had been searching for something specific. "You moved me," she said. Her voice carried the hollow echo of words spoken in deep caves, where sound bounces off limestone walls for miles before fading. I wasn't finished. I pressed myself against the far wall of the office, putting Dr. Hutchins' desk between us. Jane Doe stepped fully into the room, and with each footstep, water spread across the linoleum floor. The pebbles in her hand clicked together like wind chimes made of stone. "Finished with what?" I managed to ask. She tilted her head, considering the question. Water dripped from her chin onto Dr. Hutchins' paperwork, causing the ink to blur and run. Waiting. We've been waiting in the water for someone to bring us home. Home. Here. where the bones are buried deep in the ground remembers. She gestured toward the floor beneath us. They built this place on old graves, Confederate soldiers, Cherokee families, miners who never came out of the shafts, all mixed together in the limestone. The service elevator chime began. This time, when the doors opened, the John Doe from Current River stepped out. He moved differently than Jane Doe, less fluid, more like someone walking against a strong current. His white hair dripped steadily, creating a trail of water that led from the elevator to where I stood trapped in the office. "The cold calls us up," he said, his voice layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "When the temperature drops, the barrier's thin. We can remember what we were before the water took us." Behind him, other figures emerged from the elevator. Mrs. Hoffmeister, wildflowers blooming from her hair now, tiny blossoms that opened and closed like they were breathing. The elderly man from Potosi, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had nothing to do with human respiration. And others, bodies I didn't recognize, people who must have been stored in the deeper units of cold storage, cases that predated my employment here. All of them dripping, all of them watching me with eyes that reflected light like polished stones. "Dr. Hutchins knows," Jane Doe said. "She's known for years. The protocols keep us separate, keep the boundaries clear. But when someone breaks the rules, the walls between the living and the waiting become permeable," finished the John Doe. Through the office windows, I saw headlights turning into the parking lot. Dr. Hutchins's Toyota Corolla, driving faster than the icy roads should allow. She parked and hurried toward the building, carrying what looked like a toolbox and several containers of salt. "She's coming," I said. Jane Doe nodded. "Dr. Hutchins understands the arrangement. She maintains the protocols, and we stay where we belong. But you violated Rule 4. You entered cold storage when the temperature dropped below the threshold." "I didn't know. Knowledge isn't required. Only compliance." The front door of the morgue opened and Dr. Hutchins' footsteps echoed through the corridors. She moved quickly but not frantically, like someone executing a plan she'd rehearsed many times before. "Ezra?" she called. "Where are you?" "Main office," I shouted back. "But there are—" "I know what there are." Dr. Hutchins appeared in the office doorway, taking in the scene with remarkable calm. She set down her toolbox and opened the first container of salt, pouring a thick line across the threshold. "Hello, Margaret. William, Mrs. Hoffmeister." The bodies, the people, turned toward her with something that might have been respect. "You know their names?" I asked. "Margaret Kelly disappeared from a campground near Acres Ferry 3 years ago," Dr. Hutchins said, nodding toward Jane Doe. "William Brad went missing from a fishing trip on Current River in 2019. Mrs. Hoffmeister died peacefully, but she's been visiting us during cold snaps since we processed her Tuesday night." Margaret, Jane Doe, spoke again. "He entered our space during the calling hours. The cold hours when we can remember ourselves." Dr. Hutchins opened her toolbox and removed what looked like an electronic thermometer, but more sophisticated than anything I'd seen in the morgue. She pointed it toward cold storage, and the display showed multiple readings: temperature, humidity, and several measurements I didn't recognize. 38 degrees in cold storage, she said. "Electromagnetic fluctuations are through the roof. How long were you in there, Ezra?" "Maybe 3 minutes. I was trying to store Margaret, to store the body, when the temperature dropped. 3 minutes is long enough." Dr. Hutchins moved to her desk, water squelching under her shoes, and retrieved a different type of salt from the bottom drawer. This salt looked older, yellowed like aged bone, and when she poured it, The water on the floor began to recede. The boundary between our facility and the limestone caverns below is maintained by temperature differentials. When cold storage drops below 45 degrees, the barriers weaken. William, the John Doe from Current River, stepped closer to the salt line, but didn't cross it. "We don't wish to cause trouble, Dr. Hutchins. We only wanted to be acknowledged, to be named." "You have names now," she said gently. "Margaret Kelly, William Bragg. Your families have been notified. There will be proper burials, proper rituals." Mrs. Hoffmeister plucked one of the wildflowers from her hair and placed it on Dr. Hutchins's desk. As soon as the flower touched the dry surface, it withered back to its original dried state. "What about him?" Margaret asked, looking at me. "He saw us during the calling hours. He knows we can return." Dr. Hutchins glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "That depends on whether he can follow the protocols without deviation. Tommy couldn't. Garrett couldn't. But maybe Ezra can learn from their mistakes." She poured more of the yellowed salt around the perimeter of the office, creating a complete circle. As she did, the dripping stopped. The bodies of Margaret, William, Mrs. Hoffmeister, and the others became still again, their eyes losing the reflective quality that had made them seem so aware. "The cold is passing," Dr. Hutchins said, checking her electronic thermometer. "Cold storage is back to 47 degrees and rising. They'll return to their proper state now." One by one, the figures turned and walked back toward the elevator. Their movements became less fluid, more mechanical, like people sleepwalking through familiar routines. The elevator doors closed behind them, and I heard it descending to the cold storage level. Dr. Hutchins sat down at her desk, brushing water droplets off her paperwork. "The protocols exist because this facility sits on a confluence. Multiple burial sites, multiple types of death, all compressed into limestone that conducts spiritual energy the way copper conducts electricity. So they're ghosts? They're people who died in the water systems that feed through this hillside. The caves, the springs, the underground rivers. When conditions are right, when the temperature drops and the electromagnetic fields align, they can manifest in physical form." She looked up at me, but only if someone violates the protocols that keep them contained. I slumped into the chair across from her desk. "What happens now?" "Now you decide whether you can handle this job with perfect protocol compliance or whether you need to follow Tommy and Garrett to a different career path." Outside, the sleet had stopped, and stars were visible through the office windows. "The pay is good because the work requires absolute precision," Dr. Hutchins continued. "No shortcuts, no exceptions, no personal interpretation of the rules. Can you do that?" I thought about Margaret calling this place home, about the bones buried deep in the limestone, about the weight of responsibility that came with maintaining boundaries between the living and the dead. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." 3 weeks passed without incident. I followed every protocol to the letter, checking the laminated card so frequently that I'd memorized each rule word for word. Dr. Hutchins observed my work closely during those first days after the cold storage incident, but gradually returned to her normal schedule. Pearl seemed pleased that I'd survived my supernatural initiation, though she never directly acknowledged what had happened that Thursday night. "Most folks who work here long-term have a story," she said one Tuesday evening while organizing intake files, "something that teaches them why the rules matter. Tommy's story involved Preparation Room C. Garrett's was cold storage. Now you've got yours." She handed me the evening's paperwork, 2 routine cases from Washington County, and 1 transfer from the state medical examiner's office in Jefferson City. The transfer was unusual, a young woman named Amanda Skaggs, who'd been found in the Missouri River near Herman, but whose body had been requested for secondary examination at our facility. "Why here?" I asked, reading through the transfer documents. Pearl adjusted her reading glasses. "Sometimes the state boys find things they can't explain with standard forensic methods. When that happens, they send the cases to facilities that have specialized experience." Amanda Skaggs had been missing for 6 months before her body surfaced near the Herman Bend. According to the preliminary reports, she'd drowned, but the condition of her remains didn't match the expected timeline. Her body showed minimal decomposition despite extended water exposure, and trace analysis had detected mineral compositions that didn't occur naturally in the Missouri River system. "Limestone residue," Pearl explained, "same as we found on Margaret Kelly and William Bragg. Suggests she spent time in the cave systems before entering the main river." The transfer team arrived at 9:30 p.m., just as I was finishing my initial rounds. 2 technicians from Jefferson City wheeled Amanda Skaggs into the facility, both of them eager to complete their delivery and return to the highway. They'd driven down from the Capitol in a specialized transport vehicle that looked more like an armored truck than a standard ambulance. "Anything we should know about this case?" I asked the lead technician, a middle-aged man named Vance, who kept checking his watch. "State examiner's report is in the folder," Vance said. "But between you and me, that body's been giving us equipment malfunctions since we picked it up. Digital cameras won't focus properly, electronic scales give inconsistent readings, and the temperature in our transport unit keeps fluctuating." After they left, I wheeled Amanda Skaggs into Preparation Room A. She looked younger than her listed age of 24, with blonde hair that had been bleached nearly white by water exposure. Like the other river victims, her skin had the translucent quality of prolonged submersion, and she gripped something in her right hand. Not flowers this time, or river stones. A small metal object that looked like jewelry. I couldn't examine it closely without disturbing the body's position, but it appeared to be a locket or pendant, tarnished black by water and time. At 10:15 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. Visitors after hours weren't common, but they weren't unprecedented either. Sometimes family members arrived from distant counties, driving through the night to identify a loved one or collect personal effects. I checked the security monitor and saw a man in his 50s standing under the entrance light, wearing a heavy coat and work boots. Rule 5 was clear: direct visitors to the front office and call security. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're closed for the evening. If you need to speak with someone about a case, you'll need to call during business hours." The man looked past me into the facility's corridors. "I'm looking for my daughter, Amanda Skaggs. They told me her body was transferred here from Jefferson City." My breath caught. Amanda Skaggs was currently in Preparation Room A, less than 50 feet from where we stood. But Rule 5 existed for reasons I was beginning to understand. "Sir, I need to direct you to our front office, and I'll call our security service to assist you." His expression shifted from grief to confusion. "Security? I just want to see my daughter." I drove down from Hannibal as soon as they called me. "I understand, but our protocols require—" "Protocols?" The man stepped closer to the doorway. "My little girl has been missing for 6 months, and you're talking about protocols." I held my ground, remembering Dr. Hutchins' words about absolute compliance. "Please step into the front office, sir. I'll call our security service, and they can verify your identity and help you with the proper procedures." The man's eyes hardened. "I don't need procedures. I need to see Amanda." He pushed past me into the facility before I could stop him. I followed, pulling out my cell phone to call the security number Pearl had given me, but the display showed no signal. The landline was in the main office, but the man was already walking down the corridor toward the preparation rooms. "Sir, you cannot go back there. Please return to the front office." He ignored me, checking each room as he passed. Amanda, Daddy's here." I caught up with him outside Preparation Room A. "Sir, please. You're violating health regulations and safety protocols. I need you to..." He opened the door to Preparation Room A. Amanda Skaggs lay on the stainless steel table, still in the body bag that had transported her from Jefferson City. The man, who claimed to be her father, stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't interpret. "That's not Amanda," he said finally. "Sir, the paperwork clearly identifies..." "I know my own daughter." He turned to look at me, and his eyes held the same reflective quality I'd seen in Margaret Kelly and William Bragg. Amanda had brown hair, not blonde. She was shorter than this girl, and she never wore jewelry like that. He pointed to the object clutched in the body's right hand. "Amanda was afraid of water," he continued. "Had been since she was little. She wouldn't go near the Missouri River, let alone jump in." The temperature in Preparation Room A was dropping. I could see my breath when I exhaled, and frost was forming on the stainless steel surfaces. But the man claiming to be Amanda's father didn't seem affected by the cold. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled, and his teeth looked like river stones worn smooth by decades of current. "Someone who's been waiting for Amanda to come home. Just like you've been waiting for her to arrive." I backed toward the door, but it swung shut before I could reach it. The lock clicked into place, trapping us both in Preparation Room A with the body that might or might not be Amanda Skaggs. "The locket she's holding belonged to Sarah Kellner," the man said, approaching the table. "Sarah disappeared from a canoe trip near Washington State Park in 1987. Before that, it belonged to Rebecca Twain, who vanished while fishing the Merrimack River in 1963. The body's eyes opened. "How many young women have disappeared into these waters?" the man asked. "How many have been found wearing faces that don't belong to them, carrying artifacts from victims who came before? Amanda Skaggs, or whoever she really was, sat up on the table. The tarnished locket in her hand began to glow with pale light, and when she opened it, I saw photographs that flickered between different faces. Young women, all with the same blonde hair, all with the same translucent skin. "The river keeps what it takes," she said in a voice layered with harmonics of drowning victims. "But sometimes it gives back something else. Something that wears the shapes of the lost." The man who claimed to be her father nodded. "Amanda Skaggs is still missing. This is just an echo, a collection of memories and faces that the water has assembled into something that resembles her." I pulled on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature continued to drop, now well below anything the room's systems could explain. Frost spread across the windows, and my breath came out in thick clouds. "What do you want?" I asked. "Recognition," Amanda said. "Names for the faces we wear. Acknowledgement that we are assemblies of the lost, not individuals returning home." "Dr. Hutchins will be here soon," I said, though I had no way to contact her. The man laughed, a sound like water flowing over limestone. "Dr. Hutchins knows what we are. She's been cataloging us for years, trying to understand how the river creates these composites from the bones and memories of the drowned." Amanda stood up from the table, water beginning to pool around her feet. "But you broke Rule 5. You let me into your facility during the recognition hours. Now the boundaries are thin again. Through the frosted windows, I saw more figures approaching the building. People walking up from the direction of Highway 8, all of them dripping wet, all of them carrying artifacts that belonged to other victims. They moved in the fluid way I'd learned to associate with the river dead. "How many more are there?" I asked. "Every victim who was never properly identified," the man said. "Every missing person whose body was found, but whose identity was wrong. We've been waiting in the water, collecting faces and names, until someone breaks the protocols that keep us separate." The door lock clicked open, and Dr. Hutchins stepped into Preparation Room A, carrying her toolbox and several containers of the yellowed salt. "Hello, Sarah, Rebecca, Margaret." She addressed Amanda, not Amanda directly. "You're early tonight." Dr. Hutchins moved through Preparation Room A like she was conducting a familiar ritual. She poured the yellowed salt in precise lines around the perimeter, creating barriers that caused the pooled water to retreat toward the center of the room. The composite entity wearing Amanda Skaggs' face watched her work with curiosity rather than hostility. "You're different tonight," Dr. Hutchins said to the entity. "More coherent than usual. Sarah Kellner's memories are particularly strong in this assembly." Amanda, not Amanda, nodded. "Sarah remembers this place. She was brought here in 1987, before you established the protocols. Her family never got closure because we hadn't learned to distinguish between individuals and composites." The man claiming to be Amanda's father flickered like a projection losing signal. His features shifted, cycling through different faces. Older men, younger men, faces that shared no family resemblance to Amanda Skaggs or anyone else. "We've been practicing coherence," he said, "learning to maintain stable forms for longer periods." Dr. Hutchins opened her toolbox and removed what looked like a modified Geiger counter, except the display showed readings for electromagnetic fields rather than radiation. She pointed it at the composite entities, and the device began clicking rapidly. "Spiritual density is off the charts," she muttered. "How many individual victims are represented in this manifestation?" 17 in me," Amanda, not Amanda, said. 12 in him. "We're stronger when we combine our essences, but maintaining distinct personalities becomes more difficult." Through the frosted windows, the approaching figures had reached the building. I counted at least 8 of them, all dripping water that steamed in the February air. They moved with the same fluid grace as the entities in Preparation Room A, but their forms were less stable. Faces that shifted between identities, bodies that flickered between different heights and builds. "Dr. Hutchins," I said, backing against the wall as far from the salt barriers as possible. "There are more outside." "I know. This is what happens when someone violates Rule 5 during the confluence period." She consulted a different instrument, something that looked like a cross between a barometer and a compass. "The river system is at flood stage underground. Spring snowmelt is pushing through the limestone caves faster than usual, carrying more spiritual residue than the barriers can contain." The composite entity wearing Amanda's face tilted her head. "You understand our nature better than most, Dr. Hutchins, but understanding and accepting are different things." "What do you want?" Dr. Hutchins asked. "Recognition. Proper identification for our component parts. Sarah Kellner's family never learned what happened to her. Rebecca Twain's parents died without knowing their daughter's fate. We carry their memories, their personalities, their need for acknowledgement." Dr. Hutchins set down her instruments and pulled a thick folder from her toolbox. "I've been documenting cases like yours for 15 years. composite entities formed from multiple drowning victims, held together by shared trauma and spiritual magnetism. But official recognition would require acknowledging that traditional forensic science can't explain your existence. Then change the science, the male entity said. His voice carried undertones of all 12 personalities he claimed to contain. Expand the definitions. Adapt the protocols. Outside, the approaching entities had reached the front entrance. They weren't trying to force their way in. Instead, they stood in a semicircle around the building, water streaming from their clothing and pooling on the frozen ground. Some held objects like Amanda's locket, artifacts from victims whose identities they carried. "How long can you maintain coherent forms?" Dr. Hutchins asked. "As long as the confluence period lasts," Amanda Not Amanda replied. "When the underground floods recede and the spiritual density returns to normal levels, we'll dissolve back into the water system. Individual memories will scatter, and the component personalities will become dormant again." "And if I provide official recognition? Document your component identities and notify the families?" The temperature in preparation room. A began to stabilize. The frost on the windows receded, and the electromagnetic readings on Dr. Hutchins's instruments dropped to more manageable levels. Both composite entities seemed to solidify, their forms becoming more consistent. "Then we could rest," the male entity said. "The component personalities could find peace instead of being trapped in endless circulation through the water system." Dr. Hutchins opened her folder and pulled out a stack of missing person reports dating back decades, faces of young women who disappeared near Missouri's river systems, along with documentation of recovery efforts that had found bodies but failed to make positive identifications. Sarah Kellner, age 19, disappeared July 15, 1987, while canoeing the Merrimack River near Steelville, she read. Rebecca Twain, age 22, vanished August 3, 1963, during a fishing trip on the Current River. Margaret Kelly, age 26, went missing from Acres Ferry Campground in 2021. Amanda Not Amanda reached toward the folder, her translucent fingers hovering just above the photographs. "We remember their lives." Sarah wanted to study geology at Missouri State. Rebecca was planning to marry her high school sweetheart in October. Margaret was a teacher in Springfield who came to the Ozarks to photograph wildflowers. "But you're not them," Dr. Hutchins said gently. "You're assemblies of their memories and spiritual energy, held together by the trauma of drowning in the mineral properties of limestone cave systems." "We know what we are," the male entity said, "but their families don't. Their stories were never completed." Dr. Hutchins pulled out a specialized camera and began photographing the entities. Unlike the equipment problems the Jefferson City technicians had reported, her camera functioned normally, capturing clear images of faces that shouldn't exist. "I can provide limited recognition," she said. "Document your component identities, contact families where possible, offer them closure about their missing loved ones. But the official reports will have to list your physical forms as unidentified remains with inconclusive DNA evidence." Both entities nodded acceptance. "What about Ezra?" Amanda Not Amanda asked, looking at me. "He's witnessed 2 confluence events now. The protocols exist to protect people like him from knowledge they're not prepared to handle." Dr. Hutchins glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. "That depends on whether he can integrate this knowledge without losing his ability to function normally. Some people can compartmentalize supernatural experiences and continue their work. Others can't." I thought about the past few weeks, about following the protocols precisely and learning to accept that reality in the Ozarks operated according to rules that weren't taught in mortuary science programs. "I can handle it," I said, as long as I understand what I'm dealing with." "What you're dealing with," Dr. Hutchins said, packing up her instruments, "is a phenomenon that occurs when specific geological conditions combine with spiritual trauma. The limestone caves beneath this facility conduct and concentrate the spiritual residue of drowning victims. During confluence periods, usually when underground water levels surge, that residue can temporarily coalesce into coherent entities." She pulled out a phone and began scrolling through contacts. "I'll need to make some difficult calls tonight. Families who gave up hope decades ago are going to get partial answers about their missing loved ones." The entities outside had begun to disperse, walking back toward Highway 8 and the river systems that fed into the limestone caves. Amanda Not Amanda and the male entity started to lose cohesion, their forms becoming less solid as the confluence period waned. "Thank you," Amanda Not Amanda said, her voice now carrying distinct harmonics from each component personality. "The families will have answers now." "Some answers," Dr. Hutchins corrected. "Partial closure. It's not the same as bringing their daughters home alive, but it's better than eternal uncertainty." The entities faded like mist in the morning sunlight, leaving only damp spots on the preparation room floor and the lingering scent of limestone springs. The tarnished locket Amanda had been holding clattered to the floor, now just an ordinary piece of jewelry blackened by decades of water exposure. Dr. Hutchins checked her instruments one final time. "Spiritual density back to normal levels. The confluence period is ending." She began collecting the missing person reports, preparing to make calls that would bring closure to families who'd been waiting decades for news about their loved ones. Some of those families had probably given up hope entirely. Others might have moved away, started new lives, tried to forget about daughters who vanished into Missouri's rivers and never came home. "How often do these confluence periods happen?" I asked. 3 or 4 times a year, usually during heavy rainfall or snowmelt when the underground systems surge. Most last only a few hours, but occasionally we get extended events that can continue for days." She paused, studying the photographs she'd taken. "You handled this well, Ezra. Better than Tommy or Garrett did during their first confluence event." "What happened to them during their events?" "Tommy encountered a single composite entity during the minor confluence and couldn't accept what he was seeing. Kept insisting it was some kind of hallucination brought on by chemical exposure. Garrett tried to rationalize everything using standard forensic science, which doesn't work when you're dealing with spiritual phenomena." Dr. Hutchins locked her equipment back in the toolbox. "The key to working here long-term is accepting that some things can't be explained through conventional means, but they can still be managed through proper protocols." Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the Ozark Hills, and Highway 8 looked normal again. The frost on the windows melted as the building's heating system restored normal temperatures throughout the facility. 2 months after the confluence period, I thought I'd seen everything the Ozark Morgue could throw at me. The protocols had become second nature. Check cold storage temperature every 20 minutes, lock preparation room C at 11:45 p.m. sharp, keep the radio tuned to 104.7 FM whenever basement humming started. I'd even grown comfortable with the knowledge that our facility sat on a spiritual crossroads where the dead sometimes refused to stay properly deceased. That confidence shattered on the Tuesday night in April, when 3 separate rules activated simultaneously. The evening had started routinely enough. 2 bodies from highway accidents, both processed and stored without incident. Dr. Hutchins had left early for a conference in Columbia, and Pearl had gone home with instructions to call if anything unusual happened. At 11:30 p.m., I was finishing paperwork when the first warning sign appeared. The service elevator arrived without being called. Rule 6 was clear about elevator protocol after 10 p.m. but I'd been working alone all evening and definitely hadn't summoned it. The doors opened to reveal not an empty car, but an elderly woman in a hospital gown who looked confused and frightened. "Excuse me," she said, stepping out of the elevator. "I'm looking for my grandson, Danny Morrison. They told me he was brought here after the accident. Rule 5. Direct visitors to the front office and call security." But something about this woman seemed different from the composite entities I'd encountered before. She wasn't dripping water, wasn't carrying artifacts from other victims. She looked like an ordinary grandmother who'd somehow wandered into our facility. "Ma'am, visiting hours are over for the evening. You'll need to come back tomorrow and speak with our administrative staff." She tilted her head, studying my face. "You're new, aren't you? I don't remember seeing you before." Before I could respond, humming started from the basement storage area, low and melodic, like someone singing hymns while they worked. I needed to get to the radio in the main office, tune it to 104.7 FM at volume 6. But I also needed to handle the visitor situation according to Rule 5. "Ma'am, please follow me to the front office," I said, gesturing toward the main corridor. She ignored the gesture and walked toward the preparation rooms instead. Danny was always getting into trouble with that motorcycle. I told him those country roads aren't safe at night, but boys his age think they're invincible. The humming grew louder, and I caught myself walking toward the main office to deal with the radio situation. But Rule 5 required me to direct visitors and call security. I couldn't abandon an elderly woman to wander freely through the facility. "Ma'am, I really need you to wait in the front office while I make a phone call." She paused outside Preparation Room B. "Is Danny in here?" I checked my watch. 11:42 p.m. In 3 minutes, I needed to lock Preparation Room C according to Rule 1. The humming continued from the basement, requiring radio protocol according to Rule 2. And this woman was violating Rule 5 by refusing to stay in the designated area. "Ma'am, none of our current residents match that name, but I can help you contact the proper authorities tomorrow if you'll just..." She opened the door to Preparation Room B. Inside, on the stainless steel table, lay a young man who hadn't been there when I'd finished my evening rounds. Motorcycle leathers, helmet damage consistent with a high-speed collision, injuries that suggested he'd been dead for several hours. But according to my intake logs, no motorcycle accident victims had been delivered that evening. "Danny?" the woman said softly. "Oh, honey, what did you do?" The temperature in Preparation Room B dropped rapidly. I could see my breath, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces. But this wasn't like the cold storage incidents I'd experienced before. The cold felt focused, concentrated around the woman and the body she was approaching. My watch showed 11:44 p.m., 1 minute until I needed to lock Preparation Room C. The humming from the basement storage area had evolved into something more complex, multiple voices harmonizing in arrangements that hurt to listen to. I needed to get to the radio, but I couldn't leave the woman alone with the body that shouldn't exist. "Ma'am, please step away from the table and come with me to the front office." She reached out to touch Danny's face. "He's so cold. They've kept him too cold down here." At 11:45 p.m., exactly, I made a decision that violated protocol. I left the woman in Preparation Room B and ran to the main office to turn on the radio. The humming was getting louder, developing harmonics that made the building's metal fixtures vibrate. If I didn't address Rule 2 immediately, the situation might escalate beyond my ability to manage. I tuned the radio to 104.7 FM and set the volume to level 6. Late-night programming filled the speakers, a talk show discussing local high school basketball scores. The humming began to fade, but didn't stop completely. When I returned to preparation room B, the woman was gone. Danny Morrison's body remained on the table, but now he looked different, older. His features had shifted subtly, and the motorcycle leathers had changed to different brands, different styles. The helmet beside him showed damage patterns that didn't match what I'd seen moments before. I checked my watch, 11:47 p.m. I'd missed the window for locking preparation room C. Rule 1 specified that the door should be locked at 11:45 p.m. and not reopened until 12:25 a.m. I was 2 minutes late, and I could already hear movement from inside that room. Footsteps, maybe, or the sound of equipment being moved around. The rational thing to do would be to call Dr. Hutchins, explain the situation, and get guidance on how to handle multiple protocol violations. But my cell phone showed no signal, and the landline was in the main office where the radio needed to stay tuned to 104.7 FM. I decided to lock preparation room C anyway, even though I was past the designated time. The handle turned easily, but as the lock clicked into place, something knocked on the door from inside. 3 quick raps, then silence. Then 3 more raps, deliberate and patient. Behind me, I heard the service elevator arriving again. This time, when the doors opened, the elderly woman stepped out accompanied by a young man in motorcycle leathers. Not Danny Morrison. This was someone else entirely, with different facial features and different injuries. But both of them moved with the same fluid grace I'd learned to associate with the river dead. "Thank you for letting us visit," the woman said. "We don't often get the chance to see each other anymore." The young man nodded. "Families get scattered when the confluence periods end. Grandmother and I died 30 years apart, but the limestone caves keep our essences close together." "You're not living people," I said. "No," the woman agreed. "But we're not composite entities either. We're individuals who've learned to manifest during periods when multiple protocols are stressed simultaneously." More knocking came from preparation room C. Louder now, more insistent. Whatever was inside that room wanted out, and my late locking might have compromised the containment. "What happens if I open that door?" I asked. The woman and the young man exchanged glances. "Preparation room C contains the overflow," she said. "Spiritual residue that can't be organized into coherent entities. If it escapes before the protocols reset at 12:25 a.m., it will try to attach itself to any available spiritual energy. Including mine? Including yours?" The knocking stopped. Through the radio speakers, I heard the talk show host wrap up his basketball discussion and transition to local weather reports. Normal programming for a normal Tuesday night in rural Missouri, but the silence from preparation room C felt ominous. Whatever was inside had stopped trying to get out, which probably meant it had found another way to escape. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. "How much longer until 12:25? I asked. The young man checked a wristwatch that looked like it had been underwater for decades. 36 minutes. The humming from the basement storage area resumed, but quieter now, almost like background music. The radio continued its normal programming, the volume level maintaining the harmony that kept the spiritual density manageable. I had 36 minutes to maintain the protocols without letting any additional spiritual energy escape into the facility. 36 minutes to prove I could handle crisis situations without calling for help. The woman smiled. "You're learning, Ezra. Tommy and Garrett never made it this far." The 36 minutes stretched like hours. I sat in the main corridor, watching both the clock and the door to preparation room C, while the elderly woman and the motorcyclist maintained their vigil near the service elevator. They didn't speak much, but their presence felt protective rather than threatening. At midnight exactly, the overhead lights dimmed and brightened 3 times in succession. "That's the reset signal," the woman explained. "The spiritual density is equalizing." The humming from the basement storage area shifted to a higher pitch, then faded to silence. Through the radio speakers, the talk show host signed off, and classical music began playing. Bach's funeral cantatas, appropriately somber for the late hour. At 12:15 a.m., footsteps echoed from inside Preparation Room C. Slow, measured, like someone pacing back and forth. But the door remained locked, and whatever was inside seemed content to wait for the designated release time. "Almost there," the young man said, consulting his waterlogged watch. 10 more minutes. I've been thinking about Tommy and Garrett, about what had made them unable to continue working here. Maybe it wasn't just fear of the supernatural phenomena. Maybe it was the weight of absolute responsibility, knowing that a single protocol violation could have consequences beyond their understanding. At 12:23 a.m., the pacing inside Preparation Room C stopped. At 12:24 a.m., complete silence settled over the facility. At 12:25 a.m. exactly, I turned the key and opened the door. Preparation Room C was empty, clean. The stainless steel surfaces reflected the overhead lights with their usual clinical brightness. Whatever had been contained inside during the restricted hours had dissipated when the spiritual density returned to normal levels. The elderly woman and the motorcyclist began to fade, their forms becoming translucent as the confluence period ended. "You did well tonight, Ezra," she said. "Dr. Hutchins will be pleased to learn you can handle multiple protocol violations without compromising the facility's integrity." "Will I see you again?" "During the next confluence period, probably. We tend to manifest when new employees are being tested." She smiled. "Consider this your final examination." They dissolved into wisps of mist that drifted toward the service elevator. The doors closed behind them, and the elevator descended to the basement storage level without stopping. I completed my remaining rounds without incident. The 2 highway accident victims remained properly deceased in cold storage. The mysterious Danny Morrison had vanished, leaving no trace he'd ever existed. The intake logs showed only the 2 legitimate cases I'd processed earlier that evening. At 6 a.m., Pearl arrived for the morning shift. She found the organizing paperwork in the main office, everything documented and filed correctly. "Quiet night?" she asked, hanging up her coat. "3 protocol activations," I said. "Rules 1, 2, 5, and 6. Multiple violations, but contained without calling Dr. Hutchins." Pearl raised her eyebrows. "That's quite a test. How did you handle it?" "Prioritized the most urgent situations first, accepted that perfect compliance wasn't possible, and trusted that the protocols are designed to accommodate human limitations." She nodded approvingly. "Dr. Hutchins designed the rules to be flexible enough to handle crisis situations. The key is understanding which violations compromise safety and which ones simply require adaptation." Pearl pulled out a new laminated card and handed it to me. It was identical to my original protocol list, but with a small addition at the bottom. Emergency protocol. When multiple rules activate simultaneously, prioritize life safety over perfect compliance. Document all deviations and report to Dr. Hutchins within 24 hours. "You've graduated from probationary status," Pearl said. "Welcome to permanent employment at Ozark County Morgue." I looked at the card, then at the facility around me. The limestone caves beneath us would continue collecting the dead. Spring floods would trigger confluence periods, and spirits would test the boundaries between the living and the lost. but I'd learned to navigate those challenges while maintaining my sanity and professional competence. The pay was still good, and the work remained steady. And now I understood why.